Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he pushed the cleaning cart down the pristine corridors of the Galactic Archaeological Institute. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the polished metal walls lined with display cases containing artifacts from 1,000 different worlds. Each piece represented centuries of history, cultures that had risen and fallen long before humans had even discovered fire. He had been working here for 3 years now, ever since he dropped out of xenoarchaeology studies due to financial constraints. The irony wasn't lost on him that he spent his days cleaning around the very artifacts he'd once dreamed of studying. The alien researchers barely acknowledged his presence, treating him like a piece of maintenance equipment that happened to walk on 2 legs. Dr. Vexthalin, a tall, crystalline being from the Prism Collective, glided past without so much as a glance. Her translucent form caught the light as she moved, creating rainbow patterns on the walls. Behind her trailed 2 assistants, both chattering excitedly in their native tongue about some new discovery in the restricted vaults below. Marcus continued his routine, spraying disinfectant on the glass cases and wiping them down with practiced efficiency. The artifacts inside seemed to watch him work. Ancient pottery from the ruins of Zetha Prime, ceremonial masks from the fallen Keth Empire, and weapons forged by species whose names were lost to time. The restricted section was off-limits to cleaning staff, but Marcus had noticed that the security systems had been acting up lately. Maintenance drones had been reporting glitches in the lower levels, and the automated barriers sometimes failed to engage properly. The research staff was too absorbed in their work to pay attention to such mundane technical issues. As he worked his way deeper into the Institute, Marcus found himself in a corridor he'd never seen before. The walls here were different, older, made of some kind of dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy that made the hair on his arms stand on end. At the end of the corridor stood a single display case, larger than the others and surrounded by multiple layers of security barriers. Most were dark, their power indicators showing red warning lights. Through the transparent aluminum, Marcus could see a sword unlike anything he'd ever encountered. The blade was roughly 3 feet long, its metal appearing to shift between silver and black as the light played across its surface. The crossguard was elegant yet functional, inscribed with symbols that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. The grip was wrapped in what looked like leather, though from what creature, Marcus couldn't guess. What struck him most was how ordinary it looked despite its extraordinary setting. This wasn't some ornate ceremonial piece encrusted with jewels or made from exotic materials. It was a warrior's weapon, designed for combat rather than display. Yet it commanded more security than artifacts worth billions of credits. A small placard beneath the case bore text in several languages. Marcus recognized Standard Galactic, but there were others, ancient scripts that predated most known civilizations. The translation read, Origin, unknown. Age, estimated 50,000 plus standard years. Classification, restricted, level Omega. Warning, direct contact, strictly forbidden. Exhibits anomalous properties when handled by sentient beings. Marcus found himself drawn to the weapon, unable to look away. There was something about it that called to him, a resonance he couldn't explain. His cleaning supplies lay forgotten as he stepped closer to the case, studying the intricate patterns etched into the blade surface. The symbols weren't random decorations. They told story. Marcus's limited training in xenoarchaeology allowed him to recognize some of the motifs. There were star charts showing constellations that no longer existed, scenes of great battles fought between beings of immense power. And at the center of it all, a figure that looked remarkably human, standing triumphant over fallen enemies. How is that possible? Humans had only been part of the galactic community for a few decades. Their history stretched back only a few thousand years of recorded civilization. Yet here was a weapon older than most known species, bearing the image of what could only be a human warrior. A soft chime echoed through the corridor, indicating the end of the work shift. Marcus glanced at his chronometer and realized he'd been standing there for nearly an hour, completely absorbed in studying the blade. He should return his equipment and head home to his small apartment in the worker district. But as he turned to leave, something stopped him. The security barriers around the case were all showing red lights. They were down. In all his years working here, he'd never seen the restricted sections completely unprotected. It was as if the building itself wanted him to examine the weapon more closely. Marcus looked around the empty corridor. The night shift wouldn't arrive for another hour, and this section was rarely patrolled anyway. His rational mind screamed warnings about protocols and regulations about the consequences of touching restricted artifacts. But something deeper, something primal, urged him forward. He'd spent his entire life being told what he couldn't do, what he couldn't touch, what he couldn't aspire to. The wealthy aliens got to study humanity's past while he cleaned their messes. They made discoveries and published papers while he emptied their trash. They shaped the narrative of galactic history while he remained invisible. The case wasn't even locked. Marcus discovered this as his hand, moving seemingly of its own accord, touched the release mechanism. The transparent aluminum slid aside with a barely audible hiss, and suddenly there was nothing between him and the ancient weapon except empty air. The sword seemed to hum with potential energy, though Marcus couldn't tell if the vibration was real or imagined. The symbols on the blade appeared brighter now, pulsing with a faint inner light that hadn't been visible through the case. The leather grip looked worn but still supple, as if it had been crafted yesterday rather than millennia ago. Marcus reached out, his fingers hovering inches from the weapon's handle. Every instinct told him this was a mistake, that some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. But another voice, stronger and more insistent, whispered that this moment had been inevitable, that everything in his life had led to this single point in time and space. The moment his skin made contact with the grip, the world exploded into light and sensation. Energy coursed through his body like liquid fire, but instead of pain, Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of completion, as if a missing piece of himself had suddenly been restored. The weapon felt perfect in his hand, its weight and balance exactly right, as if it had been forged specifically for him. Images flashed through his mind. Vast space battles fought with weapons that could shatter planets. Alliances forged between species that had been enemies for millennia, and at the center of it all, humans leading the charge against forces that threatened to consume the entire galaxy. Not the humans of today, struggling to find their place among older, more established species, but humans as they were meant to be, warriors, leaders, and guardians of the cosmic order. The visions were overwhelming, too much information flooding his consciousness at once. Marcus tried to release the sword, but found his grip locked around the handle. The weapon had become part of him, or perhaps he had become part of it. The distinction no longer seemed important. As the initial rush of sensation began to fade, Marcus became aware of something else, a distant rumbling that seemed to come from the very foundations of the building. Alarms were sounding throughout the Institute, but these weren't the sharp electronic warnings of security breaches. These were deeper, more primal sounds that spoke of ancient systems awakening after eons of slumber. Through the facility's windows, Marcus could see lights appearing in the night sky. Not the orderly patterns of spacecraft or orbital stations, but wild, chaotic displays of energy that painted the darkness in brilliant hues. Something was responding to his touch, something vast and powerful that had been waiting for this moment across the centuries. The sword in his hand pulsed with renewed energy, and Marcus felt an overwhelming urge to move, to act, to claim what was rightfully his. The weapon wasn't just a tool. It was a key, a symbol of authority that commanded respect from forces beyond his understanding. And now that he had claimed it, there would be no going back. In vaults and museums across the galaxy, ancient weapons that had lain dormant for thousands of years began to stir. Each one turned toward the same distant point in space, toward a small blue planet where their true master had finally awakened. The age of humanity's hidden heritage was about to begin. The emergency lights bathed the Galactic Archaeological Institute in pulsing red as Marcus stood frozen in the restricted corridor, the ancient sword still gripped tightly in his hand. The weapon's surface continued to emit that strange, shifting light, and with each pulse he felt more memories that weren't his own flooding into his consciousness. He saw vast armadas of human ships, sleek and deadly, moving through space with purpose and authority. He witnessed diplomatic meetings where human ambassadors spoke for entire sectors of the galaxy, their words carrying the weight of ultimate law. Most shocking of all, he experienced battles where human warriors wielded weapons like the one now in his hands, each blade responding to their will as if alive. The rumbling beneath his feet grew stronger, and through the Institute's windows, Marcus could see the night sky beginning to change. Streaks of light were converging on Earth from all directions, some moving so fast they left burning trails across the atmosphere. Whatever was happening, it was happening because of him, because of his touch upon this forbidden weapon. Dr. Vexthalen's crystalline form appeared at the far end of the corridor, her usual composed demeanor shattered by panic. Her translucent body was flickering rapidly, a sure sign of extreme agitation among her species. Behind her came a squad of hegemony security forces, their heavy armor clanking against the stone floor as they advanced. Step away from the artifact immediately. Vexthalen's voice carried a harmonic quality that could shatter glass when she was angry. You have no idea what forces you're unleashing. But Marcus found he couldn't step away, even if he wanted to. The sword had become part of him, its energy flowing through his veins like a second bloodstream. More troubling, he was beginning to understand why the weapon had been hidden away, why it carried such dire warnings. The memories flooding his mind weren't just random visions. They were historical records, proof of a past that had been deliberately erased from galactic history. Humans hadn't been newcomers to the galactic stage. They had been its rulers. 50,000 years ago, humanity had commanded an empire that spanned half the known galaxy. They hadn't conquered through brute force or technological superiority alone, but through something far more fundamental. They were the inheritors of an ancient birthright, chosen guardians of weapons and artifacts that responded only to their genetic signature. The hegemony's official histories claimed that humans had evolved on a backwater planet, developing slowly and only achieving space travel in the last few centuries. But the truth burning through Marcus's mind told a different story. Humanity had once stood at the apex of galactic civilization, their authority acknowledged by every sentient species in known space. So what had happened? Why were humans now treated as junior partners in a galactic community they had once ruled? The answer came to him in a cascade of painful memories, betrayal, conspiracy, and a war that had nearly torn the galaxy apart. The other species had grown jealous of human authority, resentful of their natural connection to the ancient artifacts. Led by the Crystalline Prism Collective and the Reptilian Hegemony Council, they had formed a secret alliance to overthrow human dominion. The war had been devastating. Entire star systems had been reduced to rubble, whole species driven to extinction in the fighting. In the end, the conspirators had achieved victory not through military might, but through a weapon more insidious than any bomb. They had stolen humanity's memory. Using advanced neural manipulation techniques, they had erased all knowledge of humanity's true heritage from the minds of the survivors. They had seeded false histories, created fake archaeological evidence, and gradually convinced humans themselves that they were nothing more than a young species taking their first tentative steps into a larger universe. The ancient weapons and artifacts have been scattered across the galaxy, hidden away in museums and private collections where they would never again respond to human touch. Or so the conspirators had believed. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed that humanity's connection to these artifacts was learned, cultural, something that could be erased along with memory. They hadn't realized it was genetic, coded into human DNA at the most fundamental level. All it would take was one touch, one moment of contact between a human and their birthright, and the truth would come flooding back. Marcus raised the sword, feeling its power course through him like electricity. The security forces had their weapons trained on him, but he felt no fear. The ancient blade in his hands could cut through their armor as easily as paper, and they knew it. He could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the way they hesitated to fire upon someone wielding a weapon they didn't understand. "You lied to us," Marcus said, his voice carrying new authority. "For 50,000 years, you've made us believe we were nothing. You turned us into janitors and laborers in our own empire." Vexthalen's form solidified as she fought to regain her composure. "The old empire fell for a reason, human. Your species was too violent, too unpredictable. The galaxy is more peaceful under hegemony rule." "Peaceful?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You call this peace? Species enslaved in all but name, resources stripped from worlds to feed your bureaucracy, entire civilizations stagnating under your guidance. We brought order. You brought entropy." The truth was still flowing into him from the weapon, showing him the reality behind the hegemony's careful propaganda. Under human rule, the galaxy had thrived. Technology advanced at unprecedented rates. New species were welcomed as equals rather than subjects, and conflicts were resolved through strength tempered by wisdom. The hegemony claimed to value peace above all else, but their version of peace was the stillness of death. Innovation was discouraged, exploration limited, and any species that showed too much independence found themselves facing economic sanctions or worse. They had traded the vibrant chaos of progress for the sterile order of stagnation. Marcus took a step forward, and the security forces immediately tensed. But before anyone could fire, a new sound echoed through the corridor, the unmistakable whine of approaching spacecraft. Through the windows, Marcus could see shapes descending from orbit, sleek vessels that moved with purpose and deadly grace. "They're coming," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure who they were. The knowledge was there in his mind, planted by the weapon, but still fragmented and unclear. Vexthalen's crystalline form began to flicker again. Who? Who is coming?" Before Marcus could answer, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, but in that brief moment of darkness, something had changed. The security forces were no longer alone in the corridor. Figures in dark armor had materialized from the shadows, moving with inhuman speed and precision. These weren't human, but they weren't part of the hegemony forces either. Their armor was ancient, crafted from materials that seemed to absorb light, and each one carried weapons that hummed with the same energy as Marcus's sword. When they spoke, their voices carried the weight of millennia. "The air has awakened," one of them said, his words carrying harmonics that suggested a species had evolved specifically for warfare. "The old pacts are binding once more." Marcus stared at these newcomers, recognition dawning as more memories surfaced. These were the Shadow Guard, an elite force that had served humanity during the height of their empire. When the great betrayal occurred, they had vanished rather than submit to the new order, retreating to hidden worlds to wait for the day when humanity would reclaim their birthright. That day had finally come. Vexthalen backed away, her form becoming increasingly transparent as panic set in. "This is impossible. The Shadow Guard were destroyed millennia ago. They're myths, stories told to frighten children." The lead guardian turned his helmeted head toward her, and even through the armor, Marcus could feel the weight of his contempt. "We are as real as your betrayal, Crystalline One, as real as the lies you've fed the galaxy for 50,000 years." The security forces opened fire, their energy weapons lighting up the corridor with brilliant flashes. But the Shadow Guard moved like ghosts, their armor deflecting or absorbing the blast while they closed within human speed. The fight was over almost before it began, hegemony soldiers falling to weapons that cut through their armor as if it were paper. Marcus felt he should be horrified by the violence, but instead he felt a deep satisfaction. Justice had been too long delayed, and these beings had served the forces that kept humanity in chains. They had made their choice when they decided to serve a lie rather than the truth. One of the Guardians approached Marcus and knelt, an action that spoke of respect earned through countless battles. "My lord, the awakening has begun. Across the galaxy, the ancient weapons stir. Our scattered fleets are already moving to answer your call." "My call." Marcus looked down at the sword in his hands, beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had unleashed. "I'm just a janitor. I don't know how to lead an empire." "You carry the bloodline," the Guardian replied. "The knowledge will come, as it always has. The weapon you hold is more than a blade. It is a key to memories your species has forgotten, a link to power that has slumbered too long." Through the windows, Marcus could see more ships descending, their sleek forms cutting through the atmosphere like knives. Some were human vessels, he realized, hidden fleets that had been waiting in dark corners of the galaxy for this moment. Others belonged to species he didn't recognize, races that had apparently maintained their loyalty to humanity's rightful rule despite 50 millennia of hegemony propaganda. The age of humanity's exile was ending, but Marcus was beginning to understand that reclaiming their empire would not be simple or bloodless. The hegemony would not surrender their stolen authority willingly, and there would be species throughout the galaxy who genuinely believed the lies they had been fed. War was coming, but this time, humanity would not fight alone. Within hours of Marcus touching the forbidden blade, the carefully constructed order of the galaxy began to unravel. Reports flooded in from across known space as ancient weapons in museums, private collections, and forgotten vaults suddenly blazed to life. Each artifact turned toward Earth like a compass needle finding magnetic north, their dormant energies awakening after millennia of slumber. Marcus stood in the command center that had been hastily established in the ruins of the Archaeological Institute, watching holographic displays show the scope of what his single touch had triggered. The Shadow Guard had efficiently cleared the facility of hegemony personnel, though they had been careful to avoid unnecessary casualties. This wasn't about revenge, their leader explained, but about justice and the restoration of natural order. The sword remained in Marcus's grip, and he was beginning to understand that it might never leave. The weapon had bonded with him on a molecular level, becoming as much a part of his body as his heart or lungs. More importantly, it was continuing to feed him knowledge, unlocking genetic memories that had been suppressed by 50,000 years of careful manipulation. Commander Thane, the leader of the Shadow Guard unit, removed his helmet to reveal features that were almost human, but not quite. His ancestors had been genetically modified during the height of the Empire, enhanced for combat and longevity. The modifications had allowed his people to survive in hidden enclaves throughout the galaxy, maintaining their loyalty to humanity even as the rest of the universe forgot the truth. "The awakening is proceeding faster than we anticipated," Thane reported, gesturing to a three-dimensional map that showed the galaxy's major star systems. Red dots were appearing across the display, each one representing a location where ancient weapons had activated. "Our sleeper cells are reporting successful contact with over 300 artifacts so far, and the number is growing exponentially." Marcus studied the pattern, and something about it troubled him. "Why are they all pointing toward Earth? I thought these weapons were scattered randomly across the galaxy." "They were," Thane confirmed, "but not randomly. The conspiracy that overthrew humanity's empire was careful and methodical. They placed the most powerful artifacts in locations where they could be monitored, studied, and contained. They wanted to understand human technology without triggering its defensive measures." A new voice spoke from behind them, cultured and bearing an accent that Marcus couldn't place. What they didn't realize was that human technology was never just about engineering. It was about connection, about the bond between wielder and weapon that transcends mere physical interaction. Marcus turned to see a woman approaching, her age difficult to determine, but her bearing unmistakably regal. She wore robes that seemed to shift color as she moved, and her eyes held depths that spoke of centuries of accumulated wisdom. Despite her human appearance, there was something about her that suggested she was far more than she seemed. "Allow me to introduce myself," she continued with a slight bow. "I am Lady Ashura, last of the Keepers. We were the custodians of humanity's greatest secrets, tasked with preserving knowledge that your enemies sought to destroy." Thane immediately dropped to one knee, a gesture that seemed automatic rather than conscious. "My lady, we had thought all the Keepers were lost during the Purge." "Most were," Ashera acknowledged, her expression growing somber. "But a few of us managed to escape into the deep void, taking with us the most crucial information about humanity's true heritage. We have spent 50 millennia preparing for this day, gathering resources and allies for the inevitable awakening." She approached Marcus, studying him with eyes that seemed to see far more than his physical form. "You are not what we expected, young heir. The prophecies spoke of a warrior, someone trained in the old ways and prepared for leadership. Instead, we have a maintenance worker who stumbled upon his destiny by accident." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I didn't ask for this. I was just trying to do my job." "Perhaps that is exactly what we needed," Ashera mused. "Someone uncorrupted by expectation, unburdened by the weight of inherited ambition. The sword chose you, after all, not the other way around." She gestured to the weapon in his hands, and Marcus noticed that the symbols along the blade had changed, becoming more complex and intricate. That blade is Excelsior, though its true name has been forgotten by most. It is not just a weapon, but a repository of memory, containing within its crystalline matrix the compressed experiences of every human ruler who came before. Every ruler? Marcus stared at the sword with new respect and no small amount of fear. "How many are we talking about?" "Thousands," Ashera replied matter-of-factly. "Humanity ruled the galaxy for over 40,000 years before the betrayal. The knowledge and wisdom of every emperor, every great leader who wielded that blade, is now part of you." The implications were staggering. Marcus was beginning to feel the weight of those accumulated memories pressing against his consciousness, a vast library of experience and knowledge that threatened to overwhelm his sense of self. He could feel himself changing, becoming something more and different than the simple janitor he had been that morning. A chime from the command console interrupted his contemplation. Thane moved to the display, his expression growing grim as he read the incoming reports. "The hegemony is mobilizing," he announced. "Fleet movements detected in 17 sectors, all converging on this system. They're not taking any chances." Marcus looked at the tactical display, watching as red markers representing enemy ships began to appear at the edge of Earth's solar system. There were hundreds of them, representing the combined might of species that had spent millennia building their strength while keeping humanity weak. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Perhaps 6 hours before the first wave arrives," Thane calculated. "But we are not defenseless. The awakening has triggered more than just ancient weapons." As if summoned by his words, new contacts began appearing on the display. These moved differently than the hegemony vessels, their trajectories suggesting technologies that operated beyond conventional physics. They emerged from deep space, from hidden bases in asteroid fields, and from dimensional pockets that shouldn't have been able to exist. "The lost fleets," Ashera whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "I'd hoped they still existed, but to see them again after so long." Marcus watched in amazement as the hidden armada took shape around Earth. These weren't the sleek, efficient ships of modern design, but vessels that seemed to have been crafted by artists as much as engineers. Their hulls curved and flowed in ways that suggested organic growth rather than mechanical construction, and their weapons arrays pulsed with the same energy that flowed through his sword. "Where have they been all this time?" he asked. "Waiting," Thane replied simply. "The greatest of our admirals took their fleets into exile rather than submit to the false order. They've spent 50,000 years in the deep void, maintaining their ships and training their crews for the day of humanity's return." The sight was inspiring, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to embark on a path that would lead to unimaginable destruction. The galaxy had been stable under hegemony rule, even if that stability had been built on lies and suppression. Was it worth shattering that peace to restore a truth that most of the universe had forgotten? As if reading his thoughts, Ashera placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. I know what you're thinking, young heir. You wonder if the cost of truth is worth paying. But consider this. The hegemony's peace is the peace of the grave, a stillness that comes from crushing the spirit of every species under their control. She gestured to the display showing the galaxy beyond Earth's system. Before the betrayal, this galaxy was alive with possibility. New species emerged regularly. Exploration pushed the boundaries of known space ever outward, and innovation flourished under humanity's guidance. Under the hegemony, that progress has slowed to a crawl. Marcus studied the tactical display, noting how the hegemony fleets moved in rigid formations that spoke of doctrine and tradition rather than creativity. They were powerful, yes, but their power was static, unchanging. The lost fleets, by contrast, moved like living things, adapting and flowing around obstacles with fluid grace. The old empire wasn't perfect, Ashera continued. Humanity made mistakes, sometimes terrible ones. But we learned from those errors, grew stronger and wiser with each generation. The hegemony fears growth, fears change, because change threatens their control. A new alarm sounded, and Marcus saw that advanced hegemony scouts were already entering the outer solar system. They moved cautiously, clearly aware that they faced something unprecedented. The reports they would send back would only add to the confusion and fear spreading through hegemony space. They'll demand surrender, Thane observed. They'll offer clemency if we return the artifacts, and submit to their authority. Marcus felt the sword pulse in his hand, and with it came a surge of memories from the rulers who had come before. They had faced similar moments, times when the easy path would have meant compromise and gradual defeat. Each had chosen to stand firm, to fight for principles that transcended immediate convenience. Then, they'll be disappointed, Marcus said, surprised by the confidence in his own voice. We're not submitting to anyone. Not anymore. The battle for humanity's future was about to begin, but Marcus was beginning to understand that this was more than just a war for dominion. It was a struggle for the soul of the galaxy itself, a choice between the stagnant safety of the status quo and the dangerous vitality of progress. The sword in his hands hummed with anticipation, and Marcus realized that somewhere along the way, he had stopped being afraid. The weapons were awakening, the fleets were gathering, and after 50,000 years of exile, humanity was coming home. The first battle began not with the thunder of ship cannons, but with words. The hegemony fleet had taken position at the edge of Earth's solar system, their massive dreadnoughts forming a blockade that could have reduced the planet to molten slag within hours. But instead of opening fire, they transmitted a message that reached every human settlement from Luna to the outer colonies. Marcus watched the holographic projection of Supreme Chancellor Vorth, the reptilian leader of the Hegemony Council. His scales were the deep green of ancient authority, and his golden eyes held the cold certainty of someone who had never known defeat. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of law that had governed the galaxy for 50,000 years. Citizens of Earth, Vorth began, his voice smooth and reasonable. You have been deceived by dangerous extremists who seek to return the galaxy to an age of chaos and warfare. The artifacts you have activated are weapons of mass destruction, capable of destabilizing the very fabric of space-time. For the safety of all sentient life, we must insist that you surrender these devices immediately. The message continued with promises of amnesty for those who cooperated and dire warnings about the consequences of resistance. It was masterfully crafted, designed to sow doubt and fear among a human population that had been conditioned to see themselves as junior partners in galactic civilization. But, as Marcus listened, he felt the memories of his predecessors stirring within the sword's matrix. He could see through the polished words to the desperate fear that motivated them. The hegemony had built their entire power structure on humanity's ignorance of their true heritage. Now that the deception was crumbling, they faced a choice between maintaining control through open tyranny or losing everything they had gained through 50 millennia of careful manipulation. Lady Ashera moved to his side, her expression thoughtful as she studied the tactical displays. They're trying to buy time while they decide how to handle this. The awakening has triggered responses they didn't expect. She was right. Reports were flooding in from across the galaxy as ancient human installations came online. Automated shipyards that had been dormant for 50,000 years were suddenly humming with activity, constructing vessels from blueprints that existed nowhere in hegemony databases. Defensive platforms hidden in asteroid fields and nebulae were powering up, their weapons systems targeting hegemony strongholds with frightening precision. Most disturbing for the hegemony was the discovery that many species they thought they controlled completely were revealing hidden sympathies for humanity's cause. The Zorati, master engineers whose technology powered much of galactic infrastructure, had suddenly begun broadcasting messages declaring their ancient pacts with humanity to be binding. The mysterious Void Walkers, beings of pure energy that the hegemony had never fully understood, were emerging from their dimensional retreats to stand with the awakening fleets. They miscalculated, Commander Thane observed with grim satisfaction. They assumed that 50,000 years would be enough to erase all memory of the old alliances. But some bonds run deeper than politics or propaganda. Marcus felt the truth of that statement resonating through the weapon in his hands. The sword was showing him fragments of memory that belonged to species he'd never heard of, beings who had served alongside humanity during the Empire's Golden Age. The hegemony had labeled them extinct or primitive, but many had simply retreated from galactic politics rather than submit to the new order. A new transmission interrupted his thoughts. This one came not from the hegemony fleet, but from somewhere much closer. The face that appeared on the display was human, but there was something wrong with the features, too perfect, too symmetrical, as if they had been artificially enhanced. "Greetings, brother," the figure said, and Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "I am Admiral Chun, commanding the Purification Fleet. We represent the true inheritors of humanity's legacy." Marcus exchanged glances with Ashera, noting the alarm in her eyes. "Who is this?" he asked. "Trouble," she replied simply. "The Purists. We had hoped they were merely a legend." The transmission continued, Chin's artificially perfect features showing no emotion as he spoke. "The hegemony's lies have been exposed, but we must not allow sentiment to cloud our judgment. Humanity's empire fell because our ancestors were too weak, too willing to accept lesser species as equals. We have spent 50,000 years perfecting ourselves, purging weakness from our genetic line. Now we return to claim what is rightfully ours." Behind Chun, Marcus could see ships that were recognizably human in design, but twisted into something darker. Their hulls were adorned with symbols that made his stomach turn, and their weapons arrays seemed designed more for causing terror than achieving clean victory. "The galaxy belongs to humanity," Chun declared, "but only to those humans worthy of the inheritance. Join us, Swordbearer, and together we will establish an empire that will last forever. Refuse, and we will claim your power for ourselves." The transmission ended, leaving an uncomfortable silence in the command center. Marcus could feel the weight of choice pressing down upon him. On one side stood the hegemony, offering stability at the cost of truth and freedom. On the other stood the purists, promising power at the price of his soul. "They're not what we fought for," Thane said quietly. "During the old empire, we protected all sentient life. We led through example and wisdom, not through terror and genetic superiority." Ashera nodded grimly. "The purists represent everything that was worst about humanity's early expansion. They were exiled long before the Great Betrayal, sent into the void for crimes against the very principles our empire stood for. If they've survived all this time, she didn't need to finish the thought. Marcus could see the implications for himself. The galaxy was about to become a three-way battleground, with forces representing order without freedom, freedom without restraint, and something that might, if he was careful and wise, represent a balance between the two. The sword in his hand pulsed with new energy as more ships appeared on the tactical display. These weren't hegemony vessels or purist warships, but something else entirely. They emerged from jump points throughout the solar system, their designs unfamiliar, but somehow reassuring. Their hulls bore markings that spoke of exploration and discovery rather than conquest. The Wanderer fleets, Ashera breathed. They actually found us. Marcus watched in amazement as hundreds of ships took position between Earth and the opposing forces. These vessels had clearly traveled far beyond the bounds of known space, their hulls scarred by encounters with cosmic phenomena that existed only in theoretical physics. But they moved with purpose and coordination that spoke of discipline forged in the crucible of the unknown. A new transmission arrived, this one from a figure that was definitely human, but changed by whatever lay beyond the galactic rim. Captain Sarah Chun, no relation to the purest admiral, despite the shared name, appeared on the display with skin that held traces of stellar radiation and eyes that seemed to hold the depth of interstellar void. "We felt the awakening from beyond the barrier," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested she had learned to communicate across impossible distances. "Humanity's children have been calling from the dark between galaxies, waiting for the day we could return home." Marcus stared at this revelation. "Children? You mean there are humans outside the galaxy?" "Millions of us," Sarah confirmed. "When the Empire fell, not all of our people submitted to exile or genetic modification. Some chose to cross the barrier, to seek new homes in the spaces between stars. We've been building, learning, growing. Now we return to help you reclaim what was stolen." The tactical situation was becoming incredibly complex. 4 different human factions now occupied the solar system, each representing a different response to the great betrayal 50,000 years ago. The hegemony fleet hung at the system's edge, clearly uncertain how to proceed against such an unexpected array of forces. Marcus felt the weight of decision pressing upon him. The sword in his hands contained the wisdom of thousands of rulers, but this situation was unprecedented even in humanity's long history. How do you unite factions that have been shaped by 50 millennia of separation and divergent evolution? The answer came to him not from a weapon's stored memories, but from his own experience as a janitor, as someone who had spent years observing different species working together despite their differences. The key wasn't to choose between the factions, but to find a way to make their diversity into a strength. "Open a channel to all fleets," he commanded, surprised by the authority in his own voice. "It's time to remind the galaxy what humanity really stands for." As the communications array powered up, Marcus began to understand that the real battle wasn't going to be fought with weapons and ships, but with ideas and principles. The ancient sword in his hands wasn't just a symbol of power. It was a reminder that true strength came not from domination, but from the courage to stand for something greater than yourself. The time for words was ending, but the choices made in the next few hours would echo across the galaxy for millennia to come. Marcus stood before the communications array, the ancient sword Excelsior humming with power in his grip. Around him, the command center had fallen silent as representatives of humanity's scattered children waited to hear from the man who had inadvertently triggered the greatest upheaval in galactic history. The weight of 50,000 years of exile, betrayal, and hidden preparation pressed down upon this single moment. "Citizens of the galaxy," Marcus began, his voice carrying across space to reach every human settlement, every alien world, every hidden fleet that had answered the awakening call. "My name is Marcus Chun, and until this morning, I was a janitor. I cleaned the floors of institutions built to hide our true heritage, polished the cases that contained our stolen legacy, and like most of you, I believe the lies we've been fed for 50 millennia." He paused, feeling the memories of ancient rulers flowing through the sword, lending strength to his words. But truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. When I touched this blade, I learned what we really are. Not the young, inexperienced species struggling for acceptance that we've been told we are. We are the inheritors of an empire that once brought order and prosperity to half the known galaxy. On the tactical displays around him, Marcus could see the various fleets repositioning as his words reached them. The hegemony forces remained at the system's edge, clearly uncertain whether to attack or attempt further negotiation. The purest ships held their position with military precision, while the Wanderer fleet from beyond the galactic rim spread out in a defensive formation that spoke of hard-won experience in unknown voids. "I know what some of you are thinking," Marcus continued. "Why should we trust a janitor to lead us back to power? Why not follow Admiral Chun and his promise of genetic purity? Why not submit to the Wanderers and flee to the spaces between stars? Why not even accept the hegemony's offer of peace and stability, even if it means remaining forever as second-class citizens in our own galaxy?" He lifted the sword, and its blade caught the light in a way that seemed to set the very air on fire. Because all of those choices require us to be something other than what we truly are. The purists want us to become monsters. The Wanderers want us to become exiles. The hegemony wants us to become slaves. But we are none of those things. Through the weapons connection to the ancient databases, Marcus could feel the presence of awakening artifacts across the galaxy. Each one was responding not just to his words, but to the fundamental truth they carried. Humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their military might, but their ability to unite diverse peoples under common cause while respecting their differences. "We are builders," Marcus declared, his voice gaining strength as the sword fed him deeper understanding. "We are explorers, diplomats, and, yes, when necessary, we are warriors. But we fight to protect, not to conquer. We lead by example, not by force. We bring different species together not because we consider them inferior, but because we recognize that diversity makes us all stronger." Admiral Chin's perfect features appeared on a side display, his expression showing the first cracks in his artificial composure. Pretty words from someone who has held power for less than a day. The galaxy respects only strength. Without the will to use superior force, your empire will fall just as it did before. But Marcus felt the weight of accumulated wisdom flowing through him, the experiences of rulers who had faced similar challenges across the millennia. Strength without wisdom is just brutality. Wisdom without compassion is just cruelty. The old empire fell not because we were too weak, but because we grew complacent. We forgot that leadership is a responsibility, not a privilege. Captain Sarah Chun from the Wanderer fleet spoke next, her voice carrying the strange harmonics of someone who had traveled beyond the known universe. "The space between galaxies is vast and beautiful, Marcus Chun. Out there, humanity can grow and develop without the constraints of old grudges and ancient failures. Why risk everything for a galaxy that betrayed us?" "Because it's our home," Marcus replied simply. "And because running away doesn't solve problems, it just postpones them. The same impulses that led to our overthrow exist in the spaces between stars as much as they do here. Eventually, we would face the same choices again." Supreme Chancellor Vorth's transmission crackled with interference as the hegemony leader struggled to maintain his composure. "You speak of leadership and responsibility, human, but your awakening has already destabilized 17 sectors. Ancient weapons are powering up across the galaxy. Species that have been peaceful for millennia are declaring independence. And our careful order is collapsing into chaos." Marcus nodded, acknowledging the truth in the accusation. "Change is never comfortable, Chancellor. But stagnation isn't peace, it's death by degrees. The galaxy has been sleepwalking for 50,000 years, going through the motions of civilization while real growth and progress ground to a halt. He gestured to the displays showing the awakening artifacts, their locations forming a pattern that spoke of deliberate design rather than random distribution. Look at what's happening. These aren't weapons of conquest activating. They're tools of communication, exploration, and protection. The old empire built safeguard against the very tyranny you represent. As if responding to his words, new contacts began appearing on the long-range sensors. These weren't ships, but something far more significant. Entire star systems that had been hidden from galactic view for millennia were suddenly becoming visible again. Worlds that had vanished from all records during the Great Betrayal were revealing themselves to be not destroyed, but simply placed into a kind of temporal suspension. Lady Ashera moved to his side, her expression mixing wonder with growing understanding. The sanctuary worlds, she breathed. We always wondered what happened to them. What are sanctuary worlds? Marcus asked, though part of him already knew from the memories flowing through the sword. Emergency refuges, she explained for the benefit of the others listening. When the conspiracy against humanity became apparent, the greatest of our leaders established hidden colonies where knowledge, culture, and genetic diversity could be preserved. We thought they had been discovered and destroyed, but the evidence streaming in from across the galaxy suggested otherwise. Dozens of worlds were emerging from their hidden state, their populations having spent 50,000 years in accelerated development while remaining isolated from the stagnant galactic mainstream. The technology signatures coming from these worlds were unlike anything in current hegemony databases. Not because they were alien, but because they represented humanity's natural development unrestrained by artificial limitations. Marcus felt a surge of emotion as the scope of his ancestors' preparation became clear. They hadn't just hidden weapons and ships, they had preserved entire civilizations, complete knowledge bases, and, most importantly, the memory of what humanity could become when given the freedom to grow. The hegemony speaks of stability, he said, his voice now carrying to every corner of the galaxy through networks that had lain dormant for millennia. But what they call stability, we call stagnation. They have prevented war by crushing the spirit that drives progress. They have maintained peace by ensuring that nothing ever changes. He raised the sword high, its blade now blazing with energy that seemed to reach into the very fabric of space-time. We offer a different path. Not the genetic purity of the extremists, not the eternal exile of the wanderers, not the crushing order of the hegemony. We offer partnership. We offer growth. We offer the chance for every species in this galaxy to reach their full potential without fear of persecution or artificial limitation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the galaxy, species that had maintained their independence in hidden enclaves began broadcasting their support. Ancient allies emerged from self-imposed exile. Even within hegemony space, rebellions began breaking out as suppressed populations suddenly realized that change was possible. Admiral Chen's purest fleet began moving aggressively, clearly intending to seize control before Marcus could consolidate his newfound support. But the Wanderer fleet moved to intercept them, and for the first time in 50,000 years, humans prepared to fight other humans in open space. "Stop," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the full authority of the awakened artifacts. To his amazement, both fleets halted their advance. "We don't solve humanity's problems by destroying other humans. Admiral Chun, your people have suffered in exile, and their anger is understandable. But strength built on hatred is ultimately weak." He turned his attention to the Wanderer fleet. "Captain Chun, your people have found wisdom in the spaces between stars, but wisdom without engagement becomes mere philosophy. The galaxy needs both your experience and your knowledge." Finally, he addressed the hegemony fleet directly. "Chancellor Vorth, your people genuinely believe they're protecting galactic civilization. That belief isn't entirely wrong. Stability has value. But stability without growth is just a slower form of death." The sword in his hands pulsed with new patterns of energy, and Marcus realized that it wasn't just a weapon or even just a repository of memory. It was a communication device, allowing him to reach out across the galaxy to touch the consciousness of every awakened artifact simultaneously. Through that network, he offered not conquest, but invitation. Join us, he projected to every listening mind, not as subjects or servants, but as partners in rebuilding something better than what came before. Help us create a galaxy where every species can reach their potential, where exploration and growth are valued over control and stagnation, where the mistakes of the past inform wisdom for the future rather than excuses for present limitations. The response was like a wave of light spreading across the galaxy. Ancient defensive systems powered down rather than preparing for war. Hidden fleets emerged not with weapons ready, but with offers of alliance. Species that had spent 50 millennia in fear began to hope again. It wasn't over. It would never truly be over, because the work of civilization is never finished. There would be those who resisted, those who preferred the old ways, those who saw any change as a threat. But for the first time in 50,000 years, the galaxy had a chance to choose its own path rather than having that path dictated by fear. Marcus looked around the command center at the beings who had risked everything to stand with him in this moment. A Shadow Guard commander who had spent millennia waiting for justice. A keeper who had preserved forbidden knowledge across the ages. Human factions that had each found their own way to survive exile and betrayal. So, he said, finally, allowing himself to smile. I guess I'm not a janitor anymore. Lady Ashera returned his smile, though hers held depths of memory and loss that spoke of sacrifices beyond counting. No, Marcus Chen, you're something far more important. Your hope. The sword in his hands hummed with contentment, its purpose fulfilled not through conquest, but through awakening. Across the galaxy, ancient weapons turned toward Earth not in submission, but in recognition. The age of humanity's exile was ending, but more importantly, the age of the galaxy's imprisonment was ending as well. The real work was just beginning.